It was a chilly autumn afternoon when the package arrived. It wasn't something unusual. I often got deliveries for various items, but this one stood out. The package had no return address, only a name written in neat, elegant handwriting. Mr. Samuel Harper. I stared at the name for a moment, confused. I lived in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. My neighbors were friendly, and although we didn't always interact beyond casual greetings, there was a sense of community. But Mr. Harper? I had never heard of him before. And the more I thought about it, the stranger the package became. Who was he, and why was he sending me something? Just then I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find a middle-aged woman standing there, her eyes wide with concern. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Did you receive a package addressed to Mr. Samuel Harper?" "Yes," I replied, still perplexed, "but I don't know anyone by that name." The woman's face softened, and she took a deep breath. "He used to live here, a long time ago." Curiosity piqued, I invited her inside, and she began to explain. Mr. Samuel Harper was once my neighbor, a man who had lived in our quiet town for as long as anyone could remember. He was the kind of person who always kept to himself, rarely leaving his house except for the occasional walk or to tend to his garden. His house was small but always neatly kept, and although he didn't engage in many conversations, he had a certain kindness about him that everyone appreciated. For years, Samuel Harper had lived alone after his wife, Evelyn, passed away unexpectedly. The entire town had been shocked when they heard the news. Samuel was never the same after her death. The light seemed to drain from his eyes, and the once cheerful man became a shadow of himself, withdrawing from everyone. I remember the day when I first moved into the neighborhood. It was a few years after Evelyn's passing, and Samuel had already been living in the house next door for a while. I was new to the town, nervous, unsure about what to expect. But I soon realized that this neighborhood, with its cozy homes and peaceful streets, was the perfect place to start a new chapter of my life. I'd often see Samuel working in his garden, pulling weeds and trimming the bushes. Whenever our paths crossed, he'd give a soft nod, a quiet smile. It was clear he preferred solitude, so I never intruded. Then, one summer evening, something unusual happened. I was walking home from the store when I saw him sitting on his porch, staring out into the distance with a faraway look in his eyes. It was a clear, peaceful night, and the stars twinkled in the sky, but Samuel's expression was anything but peaceful. Without thinking, I walked up to him. "Good evening, Mr. Harper. How's everything going?" He turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like years. His gaze was piercing but full of sadness. "Everything is just fine," he replied, though his voice seemed to lack conviction. We sat in silence for a while, the quiet of the evening wrapping around us like a blanket. I wasn't sure why, but I felt an inexplicable urge to stay, as if something inside me knew he needed company. After a long pause, Samuel finally spoke again. "I miss her. Evelyn," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. I didn't know what to say. How could I comfort him when I knew so little about his pain? But something inside me made me say, "She must have been a wonderful woman." Samuel nodded, a tear escaping from his eye. "She was. She was everything to me." That night we sat on his porch and talked for hours. He told me stories about his life with Evelyn, how they had met, how they built their home together, and how, despite all their differences, they had created a life full of love and joy. He spoke about the way they laughed together, the way they cared for each other, and how he couldn't bear to live in a world without her. I didn't speak much. I simply listened. Sometimes that's all a person needs, someone to listen. Over the following weeks, I found myself visiting Samuel more often. We'd sit on his porch and chat about life, about love, and about the passage of time. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but those small moments made a difference. Slowly, he began to open up more, and I began to see the man he used to be, a man full of warmth, wisdom, and kindness. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting an orange glow over the sky, Samuel turned to me with a serious expression. "I want to thank you," he said, his voice shaky. "You've helped me in ways you'll never understand. I had forgotten how to live, but you reminded me." I was taken aback. "I didn't do anything special. I was just there." He smiled, his eyes lighting up for the first time in years. Sometimes all a person needs is someone to remind them they're not alone. Years passed, and Samuel's health began to decline. He wasn't the man he once was, but the changes were gradual. His visits to the garden became less frequent, and eventually he stopped coming outside altogether. The entire neighborhood was concerned. We all pitched in, offering help and support. I would drop by his house every few days with a homemade meal, just to make sure he was okay. There were many quiet moments, but there was still something about Samuel that made you feel like everything would be okay. And then, one day, I received the package. The woman at my door, whose name turned out to be Emily, had been Samuel's niece. She explained that Samuel had passed away a few months ago, quietly in his sleep. Before his passing, he had arranged for something special for me. The package I had received contained a letter written by Samuel himself, along with a few keepsakes from his home, items that had meant something to him throughout his life. As I carefully opened the letter, his familiar handwriting filled the page. "Dear neighbor," it began, "I want you to know how much your kindness meant to me. In my darkest days, you were the light. You reminded me that there was still love and beauty in the world, and for that I am forever grateful. Please take these items as a small token of my appreciation. I hope you'll find joy in them as I once did." The letter went on to explain how I had brought him back to life, how I had helped him rediscover the joy of living, and how he would always remember our late-night talks. The keepsakes included an old photograph of Samuel and Evelyn standing together in front of their house, smiling and happy. Another item was a small wooden box, intricately carved, containing a tiny note that read, "To the neighbor who made me believe in life again." As I sat there, holding the items, tears filled my eyes. Samuel had been a great neighbor, but more than that, he had been a reminder of the power of kindness. A simple act of sitting with someone, listening to their story, could change their world. Samuel had touched my life in ways I never expected.